I am a principal owner of Gongos Research, and I was thinking about all the answers, and really the most interesting thing about me is I really love trees and I love to be out in nature, but I'm rarely there without my smartphone. So it does say something about where we've grown up and where we are today with mobile.
Sure.
And this is Paul.
Yes, Paul Johnson at SSI, Director of Analytics there. Some interesting tidbit about me is I did competitive ballroom dance for 5 years. So.
That is interesting. Way better than mine. All right, so today we're going to be taking you through a study that we did jointly with SSI and Coca-Cola. I'm going to be covering kind of the background and the problem establishment, and then Paul's going to take us through the results. So that's where we're going to go. Oh, and I can drive here. All right, so our current environment is that right now we are in the crossfire between what respondents want and what end users want. From an end user perspective, they want long probing surveys that allow you to get deep into the psyche of respondents, and they sometimes are 30 minutes long, as we all know as marketing researchers. Respondents, they want short, impactful surveys that they can get through fairly quickly. So this is a conundrum we find. So you might have a researcher that says, hey, you know what, could you please answer some questions about beverages for me? Respondent says, sure, I'd love to give you some feedback. Researcher says, okay, great. I have 30 minutes of questions for you. I have batteries, I have grids, I have everything that you could possibly ask about beverages. And then you have the respondent that says, wait a second, what does my hair color have anything to do with the kind of beverage that I'm going to be consuming? So here is the conundrum, and this is our environment that we find ourselves in. We're not at the tipping point, though. So we do have respondents who are dealing with a 30-minute survey, but they're not very happy about it. And as researchers, we should be asking ourselves, what kind of data are they giving us at minute 23, minute 29? So really it comes down to the fact that consumers today are a little bit spoiled. They're willing to get what they want, when they want it. They can customize things like their Coca-Cola, their Fiat cars. They can pretty much customize everything. So as researchers, what are we going to be doing about this? How are we going to address that? So we set out to answer that question, and we were wondering, can we modularize a 20 or 30-minute survey that breaks down each of the pieces into bite-sized 10-minute increments, 10 minutes or so increments? So that's what we set out to do. And we thought, gosh, wouldn't it be great to capture respondents in the moment where they have some time to give us some feedback? So that could be while they're waiting for their kids to get done with soccer. It could be while they're in a line at the bank. It could be pretty much anywhere. But we allow them to give us information at a time and place that may be comfortable for them. So there's two ways we can look at this. We can look at within respondent modularization. And what this is, and this is really great for the end user, because you get one respondent to fill out all of the modules of the survey. Another way to look at this is between respondent modularization. This is really convenient because you can have a respondent answer any of the modules that you want. But sometimes you'll end up with missing data, which is difficult on the end user. When we're doing our analytics and our bivariate analysis, we need complete data sets. So we have to really get creative. And we know there are fusion techniques out there, but can we do it right? And can we do it in a way that we're going to get similar responses to a respondent who fills out the entire survey sitting in one spot at one time? So we have a couple of key hypotheses that we wanted to test. And what we did is we formed a partnership, Gongos Research, SSI, and Coca-Cola, to test some of these hypotheses with an AANU study that we had previously done for Coke. So in 2010, we did an AANU study in the frozen carbonated beverage industry, and we used that project as a basis for testing this research on research or doing another test on it. Some of the hypotheses we wanted to find out is we wanted to make sure or to see if we broke up that longer survey into modules, would it be a more enjoyable experience for our respondents? We also believe that if we provided incremental incentives in between each module, we could motivate respondents to take all of the modules in a 20 or 30-minute survey. So rather than taking a 30-minute survey, they might take 3 10-minute modules. and by encouraging them to take all of those modules on their smartphone at one time, we believe that we would have minimal data effects. We also know that there's all these data fusion techniques out there, and we really wanted to understand if this would allow for advanced analysis and some bivariate analysis. And then finally, we wanted to see if attitudinal or behavioral hook variables did a better job than the traditional demographic variables that we might look at. So this study set out to test two things. We wanted to test mobilization and modularization. So if you can imagine my grid, we had a test in a control cell for mobile, and we had a test in a control cell for all of the different modularization that we did. And we are going to be talking about all of those intersections within my grid. Can you tell we forgot a slide here? So I'm doing my slide, my visual slide, my Vanna White visual slide. So we took the survey, like I mentioned, and we started with the full questionnaire, and we broke it down into 3 modules. Pieces from each section were removed as those hook questions. Now remember, hook questions are going to help us to recreate that missing data on the back end. So it's really important that careful attention is made to identify which questions might help us to marry like respondents. The rest of the questions were split up into the 3 modules, and it's important to note that the remaining skip patterns will remain the same throughout the survey, and that respondents were randomly assigned to a starting module, and that respondents always saw a specific set of hook questions within that first module. And then the rest of them were spread out amongst the modules like they would have already been in the original AANU study. And then after each module, we gave them additional incentives to get them to take the following modules. Okay, and I'm going to hand it over to Paul, and he's going to tell you about the results.
Sure. So obviously not everyone took all 3 modules. So you have these holes in the data. You need to somehow take those pieces and assemble them all back together again. And I'll need a clicker.
Oh.
Thank you. So we wanted to test 2 different assembly methods. The first one is using respondent matching. What this is not trying to make up any data, no synthetic data. It just takes 2 different people, one who completed Module 1, one who completed Module 2, and uses those hook variables to match them together and pretend like they're the same person. So there's no made-up data. The only assumption there is that these 2 people are really one person, and you do the correlations off that. The other type of technique we wanted to try was the hot decking imputation. This is where you find all the missing data points, look at that person, use the hook questions to find similar people, and pretend that their answer was just like those other, and you fill in the missing data. So you have a whole bunch of data to put in the missing holes. And you do the analysis, at least the advanced analytics, on not just the actual responses, but the actual and the estimated responses. Aha, I hit a wrong button. There we go. So let's see how it worked. First of all, our first hypothesis is we wanted to see, does the modular experience become more enjoyable to the respondents? And you can see from the satisfaction scores, green is good, so the test cells did have a better satisfaction rating compared to the original survey than the controls did. But if you look at the data quality, you notice that you see some greens there in the test and also some reds. So the satisfaction behavior didn't necessarily reduce, even though they might have enjoyed it a little bit more. You can also see that we had one group in particular that was very different from the other 3. It's pretty easy to find which of these don't go together. A lot less bad data removed, but that's because a lot of people didn't even finish that first module in the mobile modular survey. So getting through that first module was still a barrier for this survey on a mobile device. However, if they get past that first module, using the incremental incentives, very effective in getting them to do all 3 modules. So we really liked having the incremental incentives because you don't have as big of a holes in your data set. In this case, we had 32% of the people take all three modules. 72% of the people take all three modules. That still leaves a considerable hole of, 28% that you have to deal with somehow. So, once we did that and we filled in the missing data, what type of differences do we see just overall on the baseline? And you can see when you look to a normal online control survey and you modularize it, we didn't see very many differences in the questions themselves, in the one-dimensional marginals of the question. However, that mobile modular group did have a lot of statistical differences compared to the online control. We think it's because of that 25% abandon rate. We got a selection bias in there because a lot of people decided to leave the survey. However, if it makes you feel better, practically, the recommendations were exactly the same. So when the rubber meets the road, you're going to do the same thing regardless of which way you collected that data. So minimal practical effects, even though we did see some important statistical effects. So can we do the advanced analytics? Do they hold up with the missing data techniques? And we tried the two different missing data techniques and compared it to our online control. We ran a cluster analysis to segmentation scheme to see where people fell out, and each time we came up with a 3-segment solution. So we started with the online control algorithm and applied it to the mobile modular data set, and we got a reclassification rate above 85%. We also took the algorithms from each of the mobile modular data sets with each type of imputation or matching, applied it back to the control data set, got over a 90% reclassification rate. Basically, the algorithms are almost identical. So that works well. What you do see is that the people inside the groups are different. In particular, that segment 1 is much higher in the mobile modular data. We think this is, once again, because of that 25% of people who dropped out of the mobile modular compared to the online control. We also wanted to see, hey, is the algorithm working as well on people who had missing data as it is on people who had full data sets? And you can see, yeah, the reclassification rate of those with missing data or the ones without missing data, very similar. Next, we wanted to check the bivariate relationships. By modularizing, do we influence the data? And there's some evidence of this. You can see there's a star there on the sample size because the sample size for each comparison we did is different depending on which modules we are comparing. This is without any imputation, no matching, or anything else like that. And just by modularizing your survey, you saw 15% of the correlations had statistical significant differences. In each instance, it was always decreasing the correlation. So why is that happening? It's not in the imputation techniques because we haven't done that yet. We think it's because we took that one block of grid and split it into 3 different ones, right? Because we took a third of it, put in module 1, a third of it in module 2, and a third of it in module 3. And by increasing the distances between the questions inside the grid, you naturally decrease the correlation between the results. So just by modularizing your survey in that method where you take each section and put it in each of the modules, you're going to decrease your correlation. You also see a little bit more of a decrease in the correlation. This isn't as strong when you add in the matching techniques or the hot deck imputation. But in general, you're still able to make that Tower of London out of Lego blocks, right? You can still build up in the structure, and the structure holds up reasonably well. So the imputation or the respondent matching worked very well. The modularization had an important effect. And then lastly, we wanted to test the demographic matching compared to the attitudinal and behavioral matching. And here we got something a little odd. The demographics actually reduced that segment 1 size back to the size of the online control. So somehow, I think it's just coincidence, negated that selection bias that we might have had. And why that happened, why matching on demographics was different, we don't know. We'll have to investigate further. But something in what you threw away when you used demographics versus what you threw away when you did attitudinal and behaviors returned it back to normal. But either way, once again, you see that the reclassification rate of those that had missing data, very high. The demographics, it even did better with those that were missing data. So I'll turn it back on over to Christi for some of our conclusions.
Okay, so net, what we are walking away from the study believing is that it's important to allow respondents to choose their mode. So if they can choose their mode, you decrease your selection bias in what you're doing. So you can allow them to take it online, mobile, or multimodal. The second is that within respondent modularization is really important. The more you can get a single respondent to do more of the modules, the better off you are. Our data fusion shows us that you can create some of those missing pieces, but you're best off trying to get as many people as you can to reduce those holes in the data. The third thing is that advanced analytics is feasible. As a matter of fact, we were able to recreate the algorithm for the segmentation as Paul had mentioned. So we were successful in that. And then finally, both data fusion techniques worked, although they each have their own strengths and or weaknesses. So with hot decking, and they say marketing research isn't very sexy. I just like saying that word, hot decking. It's kind of fun. But with hot decking, the reality of the situation is that you have missing data and incomplete data sets with hot decking, and it makes it hard to hand over that complete data set because it's not a complete data set. With data stitching, you have a complete data set, but the sample sizes are much lower. So those are some of the strengths and the weaknesses of those two data fusion techniques. Do you guys have any questions for us?
There aren't any on my pad here, so if somebody wants to. There's a couple of punchy comments for after lunch, but no questions. Anybody have questions? Here we go.
Well, I would probably just ask.
Well, they can't hear in the back.
So can you give us an example of the hooking questions you were talking about? I know it probably depends upon the study and that sort of thing, but that's kind of interesting so that you can hook the data together.
Yeah, so an example of a demographic one is education. An example of a behavioral one would be what's your favorite brand of carbonated beverage? Do you like the ices or the slushies or whatever? That's a behavioral one. An attitudinal one is I think we had one saying, I have a positive outlook on life, something else like that, right? Those are those psychological batteries that you have. You take a few of those, put them at the beginning of the survey, make them into a hook question.
Anyone else? Someone over here?
Have you looked at it or considered it instead of incrementally incentivizing that if they answer all three modules, then they get the full incentive, like all or nothing?
Yeah, that would be that's like not modularizing the survey at all. That would be our mobile control. So it's basically they take it all in one sitting, or maybe they could take it in multiple sittings, but most surveys, when you go back into a survey, it'll start off right where you left off. So the key part of modularizing the survey is you give them incentives at different points of time, so you give them exit strategies if they want it, so that they don't fatigue and just start giving you garbage data at the end.
I have a question going back to the hook questions. Did you do any experimentation or any research to determine which ones might be the best? So what I'm thinking is, so maybe some of the difference you saw, is it due to imputation, or maybe it's picking different hook questions?
So we saw that the demographics actually did better than the behavioral attitudes. That surprised us a lot. Any other big findings you can think of?
No, other than the fact that this was our very first research on this, and clearly there needs to be more research to determine if there are better hook variables than others. But this was going to be one study we hope that will be among many others that might come to pass.
Yeah. We didn't try subsetting the hook variables. I think we had like 25 demographic and about 70 if you use the demographics and the behaviorals.
Does this give you confidence in like translating your tracking studies to mobile and not seeing or being able to manage that transition?
Sure. I believe that if you take take out the selection bias that was occurring there, where people were hitting their mobile devices and saying, hey, this is not for me, if you let them choose their device, it looks like you're getting pretty much the same data. Practically, it was the same, even with the selection bias. But statistically, we did see differences.
A challenge is going to be getting those surveys small enough to be able to do them on a mobile device. Oftentimes, they are the epitome of your 20, 30-minute survey, if not longer sometimes. Reg.
Well, he's looking for a mic, I think.
Yeah.
We got a mic back there. Okay.
Did you get a chance to measure how many people started in one mode and finished in a different mode, and what was that like?
We didn't allow them to do that. In this one, we wanted to try and avoid any type of self-selection bias where people would choose which mode they wanted, and we randomly assigned them to a mode, and they were forced to use that mode.
And when we recruited them, one thing I didn't say is we did recruit them to have smartphone ownership and be willing to complete the entire thing on their smartphone.
Yes.
So, little detail I left out. 10 minutes.
The first module was about 10 minutes, and the other two were, 7 minutes each? Because the first module had the hook questions in it. And that first module could have been either Module 1, Module 2, or Module 3. It was a random assignment.
So the missing person up there is Coke. What did Coke think?
Coke was happy to kind of play in the whole modularization and mobilization space, and I don't know exactly what they've taken forward in terms of what they're doing right now, but they learned a lot. They co-presented the same study with us at the TMRE last year, and so they definitely have taken it forward, and it has informed what they're doing with their mobile practice.
Yeah. They don't know all the technical details, maybe, but I think they love the results.
That's what they have us for.
Thank you very much.
Just a minute.